welcome to the very first episode of My Life on the Hill. And we've got some really interesting stuff to talk about this week. First off, we're going to go down and we're going to look at a little bit about foraging for firewood, preparing for the winter, which is fast approaching because it is a wonderful sort of autumnal scene at the moment. Subsequent to that, we're going to do a little bit of wild foraging and make a particularly tasty treat in readiness for Christmas. And after that, I'm going to give you a little inkling on something wonderful that I and a friend helped me create some years ago that's flourishing now. So we're going to look at that and a few other interesting things. So come with me and let's go and have a look. Is that you've got to prepare for at least the next year ahead, and I'm always conscious that I've got to stack my firewood in readiness for the whole of the winter to keep it dry, especially with our wood burners, because wood burners hate wet wood. So consequently now we're in September, and I'm thinking one of the things that I wanted to do, in fact a couple of months ago, was to get this firewood up to the back of the house so that I've got lots and lots of really dry toasty wood for the whole of the winter. So I'm going to cut up this pile now, get it into the trailer, and then psychologically I can be cleansed about having sufficient fuel to keep us really toasty all winter long. One of the fascinating things about firewood is, again, the ability to observe. And when I look at a log, sometimes I'm slightly torn on whether to knock it into a few pieces or whether to enjoy it for what it is, because it is a feature in itself. And I just wanted to show you something. So this fantastic piece of oak has been sat down the bottom of the paddock since last winter, when I clambered up into the woods and tossed it over my shoulder and brought it down and left it here in preparation for some cutting up later on in the year. And consequently some wonderful fungus has developed off the back of it. And if you look at this fungus, it has beautiful concentric rings in much the same way as the wood has. And in many respects it's a pleasure to look at that, the finer detail of the material that you're going to burn, as part of the enjoyment of harvesting it really and putting it on the fire. And the other interesting thing is to remember that this wood often hosts a whole bunch of inverts, and as I look down at this log now, there's lots of little wood lice that are making a break for it, and it's always worthwhile leaving the wood lice in the field from whence they came, because the problem with taking them back up and putting them near to the fire is you'll put them on the fire and you'll see all these little wood lice making a break for it, trying to get off the flames. There's a bit of a balancing act really to make sure you don't incinerate things sort of inadvertently. We thought what might be quite fun is to give you guys a little bit of an insight into how to create something that's quite simple but rather special. In order to be able to see what it is that we're going to talk about creating, I've got to take this ladder with me. It's a little bit heavy and Liv's holding me up here a bit while she's filming this, but I'm going to make it down the bottom. This is one of the disadvantages of living on a hill. You've either got to go down or you've got to go up. But we'll go down there and see what it is that we want to talk about. Because it looks denser and more sort of slightly more interesting. So here it is, a sedum roof on the top of our stable. I think that to create something like this is so much more splendid than a conventional roof, because bearing in mind that we live up the hill, so we're sort of looking down on this, and our neighbours that are directly behind us now, rummaging around in the undergrowth, wondering what I'm doing talking to this camera, will be looking down on this. So I was conscious when I built this stable, I wanted to make something on the top that was aesthetically pleasing, and it was more work than putting on sheets of corrugated tin. There's no way of getting away from it. But what we've done, what we've achieved, is I think I'm really quite thrilled by it. And all it is a bit like making a pond. But instead of filling that pond with water, I've covered this surface area with soil. And I mixed in some sharp sand and some horse manure, just to give it a little bit of bulk, a little bit of organic matter, just to hold the moisture in the earth. Because, of course, the way sedums work is that they monopolise on a moment in the summer where it rains, and they absorb all that liquid. And of course, in a very shallow substrate, which is what this is on top of this roof, the moisture tends to leave quite dramatically, quite quickly. But of course, the sedums have held on to that moisture that they've sort of made the most of it in that one moment, and they can flourish off the back of that. So they need to be able to be wet and then almost immediately dry. So essentially what we've replicated is a cliff-top environment. So it's not something you necessarily see here, but it's something that's very natural here. And when all these sedums flower, of which there's several different species, you get loads and loads of different inverts resting on this roof. And sometimes I see a cheeky pigeon plucking out some of the plants that I've popped on here for their nests and the like. But you know, the reality is that there's probably plenty to go around. So all I've done is I've sandwiched some butyl, good rubber bond membrane, between two layers of geotextile. So geotextile is like a non-rotting fabric, easily available online or from various other retailers. You'll notice that there's a little gravel channel right the way around the roof. And it's not always necessary, but it's sensible, because what the gravel will do is you can build it up against the liner on the edge, stop the sunlight getting on it and perishing it, but also it serves to remove any excess water. So you've got, if it does bucket down on this roof, then really rather than sort of inundate the fascia boards around the edge of the roof, these gravel channels will direct the water to the edge of the roof where it can soak down into the pipes. But the result here is here to see, and it's something that will improve year on year. And I think that's really, really important with anything in the garden. You really don't want to put something in that stays the same. It's the change that makes things really interesting. And if you can build something that will change without you having to get involved, then that's got to be a winning formula. It's really quite early, but I've just found a field mushroom. And I'd just quite like to show you. This is an area that tends to have a few field mushrooms, but tends to be a lot later in September. Look at this beauty. You can see where it's been nibbled by mice and slugs, possibly a bit of slug. And it's always worth just looking inside them to see. And unfortunately this is no good, because it's got lots of little tiny maggots in it. Another thing that you tend to have to do is grab the season by the horns, and fortunately, despite those ridiculously strong winds we've had recently, there are still some damsons hanging onto the tree. So I wanted to take you down to where the damsons are growing, and we can pick a bunch of those, Liv and I, and that's a real treat for Liv. And we'll take them up to the house and make a very easy little treat that we can enjoy around Christmas time, or before, depending on your tastes. So we've landed at the damsons. I mean, you tend not to see that many damson trees around these days, which is a real shame, because they're particularly tasty. Like a lot of small things, they're quite intense in their flavour. Very fruity, very tasty, much superior to sloes. If you're out foraging in the countryside, then don't worry about sloes if you've got damsons to pick. And they make lovely puddings and lovely jams, but they make particularly tasty spirits. So I'm going to pick a couple of pounds of these now to take up home before we make our lovely little treat. I think this little lot should do us. I've got a couple of pound of damsons there, probably more than I need, but I can always pop any excess into the freezer and go back to them at a later stage. In fact, sometimes when you're making what we're going to make in a minute, it's often a better idea to put them in the freezer rather than it is to prick them. So this is it. I've brought you into the kitchen to show you exactly what we're going to do with the damsons. We're going to make damson vodka, and it's particularly important to make it really at this time of the year in readiness for Christmas. It's not something you can drink straight away. It's something that needs minimum maintenance. You've got to give it a good shake up all those sugars to get them dissolved over the next couple of months. But it is a beautiful drink, well worth making, far superior to sloe gin or something like that. So all you need to do, dead simple, is you put in, get your damsons, need about 12 ounces of damsons for half a litre of vodka, and then you can kind of multiply it up from there on if you want to make a few more. It's important to prick the damsons, or alternatively you can put them in the freezer, if you've done a Blue Peter thing and prepared earlier, put them in the freezer and then use them, and that kind of breaks down the skin and allows all the juices to leach out. But otherwise, get a little fork, prick your damsons, and then pop them into the demijohn or any large jar that will seal. And this I washed and I sterilised by putting it in the oven for an hour earlier on today. How important it is to sterilise it, I'm not sure, because of course alcohol has its own sterilising properties anyway, so once you pour the vodka in there, that would probably bump off anything that resides in the bottom of that jar. But just to be on the safe side, so I'm pricking all these damsons relatively quickly, and they are really ripe. And it's kind of important to make sure they're ripe because of all the sugars have developed beautifully, and we're going to add more sugar anyway. And it's an interesting thing, really. You tend to need to put in quite a lot of sugar, not necessarily to make it sweet, but to bring out the flavour. And it does take the edge off the bitterness that damsons sometimes have, of course. So I'll prick all these. It shouldn't take me more than half an hour, something like that. So I'll pop them in here, and in a moment we'll add our vodka and our sugar. Right, I'm going to weigh out some sugar. It's worth remembering how much sugar you put with your vodka or your gin, or your brandy for that matter, whatever sort of fruit liqueur you're making up. Because if it's a little bit too sweet or not sweet enough, then you can add a little bit more sugar or a bit less the following year when you do the same again. Because believe you me, if you haven't done it before, you will be doing the same again. So I'm going to put about 150 grams of sugar in. So essentially half as much sugar as there is fruit. So now the best bit, any vodka, any cheap vodka is absolutely fine. So, local supermarket, bottle of vodka, and I'm going to put in half a litre in here because I want to use the other half for some blackberry vodka. So that's it, yep, cork it, put the stopper in, and then give it a good shake. And what I'll do is give this a good shake once a day for probably about 6 weeks until all the sugar's dissolved and then after that period I'll go back and probably give it a shake once a week for about and for the whole lot about 3 months, and that'll be ready. We're in September, that'll be ready at Christmas time, so it'll be very tasty and it'll be a beautiful colour, very sweet. I'm going to put this in a dark place and try and remind myself to give it a shake every day. The problem when you kind of hoard things away is you tend to forget about doing something with them. I'm not entirely sure why I'm putting it in a dark place, but it's something that I've done for donkey's years, something I've seen done. So you know, if anybody knows why I'm putting this in a dark place, then just let me know. That's it for this time. I hope you've enjoyed this little insight into my life on the hill. It's a wonderful thing about nature, and I always like to think that I can live as symbiotically as possible with all the other living things around me. But there's constant changes and lots of adaptations to make. So I hope you can join me next month to look at various different things that will be happening from this point. See you next time.